Well, good morning. So glad that you've joined us as we continue to work through the Psalms together. It's been a great joy doing this every morning and just learning from God's Word. So this morning we're going to look at Psalms 14. And this psalm is a little bit different in that some of the more recent psalms that we've walked through have really focused on feelings and praying those and processing those. And I might be oversimplifying a little bit here, but we're going to watch David work through, encourage us in this psalm by observing and writing and reporting to us some of his thoughts on circumstances and culture, the heart and motives of people, and perhaps he's going to reflect on a recent current situation that he's just experienced. And then he's going to pose a few somewhat rhetorical questions that's going to give us pause to think about just how low we humans can sink. And then he's going to make a solid proclamation, one of those awesome but God statements. I just love them. And might even throw in one of those future hope statements, when the Lord. And then David's going to be reminded by those in his heart. He's going to speak out loud these incredible truths so that his heart is made glad. So let's begin in verse 1. We'll read together. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and they do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Have they no knowledge, all the evildoers who eat at my people as they eat bread and do not call upon the Lord? There they are in great terror, for God is with the generation of the righteous. You would shame the plans of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, let Jacob rejoice, let Israel be glad. Well, part of the context of this psalm might be coming from a recent experience that's recorded in 1 Samuel 25, where David has this run-in with an evil man named Nabal. And he wouldn't help David when David was in need. And this dude truly lived up to his name, which interestingly enough is translated in Hebrew as fool. And so in this psalm, David is writing about a fool that knowingly does evil and is even proud of it. Sounds a lot like what he just went through. So in these first verses, David possibly could be reflecting on all he had just encountered and what he experienced. And he gives us a quick summary on his thoughts on the heart condition of those who reject God. You know, David's not talking here about those who aren't smart enough to figure God out, because that's none of us. But he's describing those who simply reject God. He's reflecting and he's thinking about not only what the fool has said, which in and of itself is significant, but also that he has said it in his heart. It's deep in his belief system. Not just describing someone with intellectual objections to the existence of God, but someone who at the very core of them rejects God. This must have seemed somewhat absurd and mind-boggling to David, who had seen the Lord demonstrate his power and his provision over and over and over again. Then David turns his thoughts to the perspective of the Lord, who searches to see if there are any who understand or seek after him. Well, God's certainly not wondering if there are any smart enough to figure him out, right? None of us can do that. He's asking if there are men who see his heart and his plan and who seek him for righteousness' sake. God promises us that when we seek him, he will be found. This is grace. And when this grace is given and our spiritual eyes are opened and we're invited into a relationship with God Almighty through Jesus, and our filth is replaced with the righteousness of God. I can almost hear David's sadness in the next verse as he says, they've all turned aside. Together they've become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Interestingly, some of these same thoughts and truths, the Apostle Paul uses them in Romans 3 to describe us and our sin, and that we're all born with the will and the capacity to do evil. No one has to teach little ones how to do bad things, right? And day to day, many of the ways that we live our own lives are from a place of self-protection or self-concern, and we're placing our wants and desires and priorities before that of living humbly and self-denying before God. And that is sin. And while we certainly rank sin, we compare ours to others, the reality is that all of our righteousness, our very best, is but filthy rags compared to the holiness of God. David here, he observes and he remembers that man's truly, profoundly, and deeply fallen. This part I lingered over, and I will for the rest of the day. I am so thankful that the Lord has took our sin away and given us his righteousness. Well, David is confident as he works through his observations and he's posed these questions. Not only does he seem to have an understanding, a head knowledge, a rational, concise theologically sound understanding of this doctrine that he believes that he chooses to believe, but also he demonstrates that he knows God's character. You know, it's in the difficult situations, in the quiet of the night, when we're alone with our thoughts and we're pouring out our hearts to God. It's in these times that we can easily go from experiences immediately to feelings like fear or worry or anxiety or anger or despair, regret. It's in these moments we must run to truth, to the promises of God. When we confront, whether intellectually or emotionally, our own paradigms of belief against what God says and who he is, it's in these times that we grow in our faith and we begin to be able to boldly ask God for the victory and for deliverance that he's promised to us, his people. In the last verses of this psalm, David proclaims that God is with the righteous, that the Lord is our refuge. Salvation will come, and we wait for the promise from the Lord to restore. What a difference this would make in our lives if we believe this with all our hearts. And then David's last statement, after thinking about the fool, the Lord looking for those who are seeking him, after he's reflected on the depth of sin of us all, and then he's remembering who God is and what he's promised, he finishes this with a phrase that almost says, okay, on with the day. God's got it. He says, let us be glad. Friend, may you know that God is with you. He's your refuge. Salvation has come, and it's offered to you. And his promise to restore is meant just for you. So let's go conquer the day, and let us be glad. Well, God bless you. We miss you. Be watching this week for more and more information about how we're going to be able to be together again soon. And that is a day that we have been thinking about and praying for and looking forward to.